Victoria Calloway stood on the train platform in Independence, Missouri, clutching a worn leather satchel and a letter that promised salvation but guaranteed nothing resembling love. The year was 1879, and the humid August air pressed against her black mourning dress like an unwelcome embrace. 3 months had passed since her father's death left her penniless and desperate, and 6 weeks since she'd answered the advertisement in the Kansas City newspaper. A rancher in Desdemona, Texas, needed a wife. The arrangement would be purely practical, the letter explained. He required someone to manage his household. She required security and a roof over her head, nothing more, nothing less. Victoria had signed her response with a steady hand, telling herself that a loveless arrangement was preferable to the alternative becoming a burden to her married sister, or accepting employment in one of the questionable establishments that lined the seedier streets of Independence. The train whistle shrieked, announcing departure, and Victoria climbed aboard with the resignation of someone walking toward an uncertain future. She found a seat beside a window, already dusty from the journey's beginning, and watched Missouri disappear behind her. The landscape transformed gradually as hours turned to days, the green hills giving way to endless prairie, then to the rugged terrain of Texas. She shared brief conversations with other passengers, but mostly kept to herself, reading and rereading the 3 letters she'd received from Wade Xavier. His handwriting was surprisingly refined, his words direct but never unkind. He described his ranch, the modest house, the cattle operation he ran with hired hands. He'd mentioned his age 29 and asked about hers. She told him the truth. 23, educated but now without prospects. He'd never promised affection. He'd been honest about wanting an arrangement that benefited them both. Victoria appreciated honesty. She'd seen enough false romance in her parents' marriage to know that affection could fade, but practical partnership might endure. The train pulled into the small station at Desdemona on a Thursday afternoon, the sun burning overhead with merciless intensity. Victoria stepped onto the platform, her legs unsteady after days of travel, and scanned the handful of people waiting. A man stood apart from the others, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low against the glare. He wore dusty work clothes and boots that had seen considerable use. As she hesitated, he moved toward her with a purposeful stride. "Miss Calloway." His voice was deeper than she'd imagined, with a slight drawl that marked him as truly Texan. "Mr. Xavier." She extended her hand formally, and he shook it with surprising gentleness. Wade Xavier was handsome in a rugged way that seemed carved by the harsh landscape itself. Sun-weathered skin, strong jawline shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of aged whiskey that studied her with frank assessment. She met his gaze directly, refusing to be cowed. Whatever this arrangement would be, she intended to enter it with dignity. "You had a long journey." It wasn't quite a question. 3 days. The train was delayed in Dallas. He nodded and reached for her satchel. "I have a wagon waiting. It's about an hour to the ranch." The town of Desdemona was small, its main street lined with the essential establishments: a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith. People watched with undisguised curiosity as Wade helped Victoria onto the wagon seat. She could feel their eyes assessing her, wondering about this Eastern woman who'd come to marry a man she'd never met. She kept her spine straight and her expression composed. The ride out of town was initially silent. Wade handled the horses with easy competence, and Victoria studied the landscape. It was beautiful in a stark way, all wide sky and rolling hills dotted with mesquite and live oak, so different from Missouri's gentle greenness. "It's quite remote," she finally said. "Does that trouble you? I'm merely observing. I knew what I was agreeing to. He glanced at her. Did you? The question held no challenge, only genuine curiosity. Victoria considered it carefully. I agreed to a practical arrangement, a contract marriage. You need someone to manage your household. I need security. We both understand the terms. That's a cold way to put it. Would you prefer I pretend romantic sentiment where none exists? Something flickered in his expression, amusement, perhaps, or approval. No, I appreciate honesty. Then we'll deal well together. The ranch appeared gradually, first the fencing, then outbuildings, finally the house itself. It was larger than she'd expected, a solid two-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Clearly, Wade Xavier was more prosperous than his modest letters had suggested. Several men worked near the barn, and they paused to watch the wagons approach. Wade pulled up before the house and climbed down, then helped Victoria descend. His hands on her waist were brief and impersonal. I'll show you inside. You'll want to rest before supper. The interior was surprisingly well maintained. The furniture was simple but sturdy, the floors clean, the windows allowing generous light. Wade led her upstairs to a bedroom that was clearly meant to be hers alone. I thought you'd want your own space, he said, setting her satchel on the bed. My room is down the hall. Victoria studied him carefully. You're being very considerate for a man who advertised for a wife. I'm not a brute, Miss Calloway. This arrangement serves us both, but that doesn't mean it needs to be unpleasant. He moved toward the door, then paused. The Reverend will come tomorrow to perform the ceremony, unless you've changed your mind. I haven't, he nodded. Supper is at 6. I'll let you settle in. After he left, Victoria sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment of uncertainty. She was hundreds of miles from everything familiar, about to marry a stranger, entering a life she could barely imagine. But returning to Missouri wasn't an option. Her sister's husband had made his reluctance to support her quite clear. This was her choice, made freely, and she would see it through. She unpacked her few belongings, changed from her traveling dress into something fresher, and went downstairs at 6 o'clock. The kitchen was large and clearly the heart of the house. Wade stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled surprisingly appetizing. You cook? She couldn't hide her surprise. I've been managing alone for 3 years. I learned or starved. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table. It's nothing fancy. They ate in companionable silence. The stew was actually quite good, filled with beef and vegetables and seasoned competently. Victoria found herself genuinely hungry after the days of train food. This is very good, she said. Thank you. I'm hoping you're a better cook than I am, though. That was part of the arrangement. I am adequate in the kitchen. My mother insisted on practical education despite my father's protests. He wanted you to be a lady of leisure. He wanted me to marry well. Instead, I'm marrying practically. Wade set down his spoon. Do you regret it? Victoria considered the question seriously. Ask me in a year. He actually smiled at that, a brief transformation of his serious face. Fair enough. After supper, he showed her around the ranch as the sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He introduced her to his 3 ranch hands, Tom, Charlie, and young Billy, who couldn't have been more than 19 and stammered when meeting her. The men were respectful but clearly uncertain how to act around a woman in what had been an entirely male domain. They're good workers, Wade told her as they walked back to the house. They usually eat with me, but I thought you might prefer to establish your own routine. I don't mind cooking for them if that's been the custom. It would be helpful. I can pay you for the extra work. That's unnecessary. If we're to be married, even in name only, their care falls under my responsibilities. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. The last light of day cast his face in shadow. "Victoria, may I call you that, of course, we'll be married tomorrow." "Victoria, I want to be clear about something. This marriage is real, at least in the legal sense. I'm not looking for something temporary or false. But I also don't expect more than you're willing to give. We'll figure out what that means as we go." The honesty in his voice surprised her. "What do you want from this marriage, Wade? Partnership, companionship, eventually. Someone to share this life with. I've been alone long enough to know I don't prefer it." "That's more than you mentioned in your letters. Letters have limitations, so do first meetings." "But we have time to understand each other." Victoria nodded slowly. "I appreciate your directness. It's the only way I know how to be." They walked back to the house together, and Victoria felt the first stirring of something that might eventually become ease between them. He was not what she'd expected. She'd braced herself for someone rough, possibly cruel, certainly indifferent. Instead, he seemed thoughtful, honest, and unexpectedly considerate. It wasn't love would never be love, but perhaps it could be something stable and decent. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, she listened to the sounds of the Texas night, so different from Missouri. Insects sang in the darkness, and somewhere distant, cattle lowed. Down the hall, she heard Wade moving in his room, then silence. Tomorrow she would marry him. The day after, and the day after that, she would begin learning what her new life meant. The fear she'd carried since leaving Missouri began to ease slightly, replaced by something she hadn't expected: possibility. The Reverend arrived mid-morning, a jovial man named Reverend Matthews who seemed unsurprised by the circumstances. Apparently, contract marriages were common enough in this part of Texas. Tom, Charlie, and Billy served as witnesses, all three dressed in their cleanest clothes and looking painfully uncomfortable. Victoria wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes. Wade wore clean trousers and a white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. They stood in the parlor, and Reverend Matthews performed a brief ceremony. The vows were traditional, the same words spoken by couples deeply in love and those marrying for convenience alike. When Wade slipped a simple gold band on her finger, his hands were steady. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife and invited Wade to kiss his bride, he leaned forward and pressed a chaste kiss to her cheek. "Mrs. Xavier," he said quietly. "Mr. Xavier," she replied, and something in his eyes suggested he heard the slight tremor in her voice. After the Reverend left and the ranch hands returned to their work, Victoria and Wade stood in the parlor, suddenly alone and officially bound to each other. "Well," Wade said, "we're married. So it seems. Are you all right?" The question, asked with genuine concern, unexpectedly touched her. "I believe so. It's strange, but not unpleasant. That's something." He hesitated, then continued. "I need to ride out to check the northern fence line. I'll be back before supper. Will you be all right here alone?" "I'm perfectly capable of managing for a few hours." "I know. I just wanted to ask." After he left, Victoria began truly exploring her new home. The kitchen was well stocked, the pantry full. The parlor held books, surprisingly many books on shelves built into the wall. She examined the titles: practical volumes on ranching and agriculture, but also novels, poetry, even some philosophy. Wade Xavier was educated then. That was unexpected. She found cleaning supplies and began working through the house systematically. It was clean by bachelor standards, but she saw room for improvement. She threw open windows to air out rooms, beat dust from curtains, scrubbed floors. The physical labor felt good after days of sitting on trains. She was examining the linen closet when she heard a hoarse approach. Wade appeared in the doorway of the linen closet, looking surprised. "You've been busy." The house needed attention. You didn't have to start immediately. You just arrived yesterday. I prefer to be useful. He studied her for a long moment. You've opened all the windows. The house needed airing. It's letting in dust, which I'll clean. Fresh air is important. This is Texas, Victoria. We keep windows closed during the day to keep out the heat. She felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Oh, I didn't realize. In Missouri. This isn't Missouri. He said it gently enough, but she still felt foolish. I'll show you how things work here. Different climate, different needs. The moment crystallized something for Victoria. She'd entered this marriage believing she understood the arrangement, but she was truly in a foreign place, ignorant of basic realities. The realization was humbling. I apologize, she said stiffly. No need to apologize. You didn't know. He moved to close the nearest window. Help me get these shut before we lose too much cool air. They worked together through the house, closing windows, and Victoria felt acutely aware of her ignorance. When they finished, Wade seemed to sense her discomfort. Come outside, he said. I want to show you something. He led her to the barn where several horses were stabled. He stopped at a stall containing a beautiful bay mare with a white star on her forehead. This is Willow, he said. She's gentle and well-trained. I thought you might want to learn to ride. You'll go crazy staying in the house all day. Victoria stared at the horse, then at him. You're offering to teach me. Unless you already know how. I've ridden in carriages, never on horseback. Then I'll teach you. Not today, you need to settle in more, but soon. The gesture, coming after her embarrassing mistake with the windows, unexpectedly moved her. Thank you. That's very kind. It's practical. You should be able to get around the property. But there was something in his voice that suggested kindness wasn't entirely absent from the motivation. They returned to the house, and Victoria began preparing supper. Wade sat at the kitchen table, ostensibly reviewing ledgers but frequently glancing up to watch her work. She was intensely aware of his gaze. You're staring, she finally said. I'm getting used to having someone else in the house. Is it strange? Yes, but not bad strange. The ranch hands joined them for supper, and Victoria served beef, potatoes, and fresh bread she'd managed despite the unfamiliar stove. The men ate with enthusiasm, complimenting her cooking between bites. Billy particularly seemed awestruck by having a woman present. This is wonderful, Mrs. Xavier, he said earnestly. Best meal we've had in months. Mr. Xavier's stew last night was quite good, she replied diplomatically. Tom laughed. That's because he was trying to impress you. Usually, we get beans and whatever meat isn't too tough to chew. Wade gave Tom a quelling look, but Victoria thought she saw embarrassment in his expression. The idea that he'd made an effort for her first night was oddly pleasing. After supper, as Victoria cleaned the kitchen, Wade sent the hands back to the bunkhouse and returned to help her. You don't need to do that, she said. I've been cleaning up after myself for 3 years. I can manage one more night. They worked in silence for several minutes before Wade spoke again. About earlier with the windows, I didn't mean to make you feel foolish. I was foolish. I assumed I understood things I don't. You'll learn. This country takes getting used to. Victoria set down the dish she was drying. Why did you really bring me here, Wade? The truth, not the practical reasons in your letters. He leaned against the counter, considering his answer. I inherited this ranch from my uncle 3 years ago. I'd been working cattle drives, seeing the country, not putting down roots. When he died and left me this place, I thought it was my chance to build something lasting. But a ranch is more than land and cattle. I was going through the motions, not really living. I wanted someone to share it with, to make it feel like a home instead of just a place I work. Why not court someone? Why advertise for a wife? I'm not good at courting. Don't have patience for the games people play. And women in town, they want romance and sweet words. I'm better at honesty than poetry." Victoria absorbed this. "I appreciate honesty too. But surely there are women who would value what you're offering without requiring an advertisement." "Maybe. But I'm also impatient. I wanted to find someone practical, someone who understood what they were getting. You seemed level-headed in your letters, intelligent, not full of illusions about what this would be. And now that I'm here," he met her eyes directly, "you're more than I expected." The simple statement, delivered in his straightforward way, affected her more than elaborate compliments would have. She looked away first, suddenly flustered. "I should retire," she said. "It's been a long day, of course. Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Wade." In her room, Victoria prepared for bed and found herself thinking about her new husband. He was unexpected in every way. She'd braced herself for indifference or worse, but Wade treated her with consistent consideration. It wasn't love, but it was more than she dared hope for. As she fell asleep, she thought that perhaps this arrangement might become something bearable, even satisfactory. The days developed into a rhythm. Victoria woke early and prepared breakfast for Wade and the ranch hands. After they rode out to handle the day's work, she managed the household cooking, cleaning, mending, all the tasks that had been neglected in a house full of men. She found satisfaction in bringing order to the space, in making the house feel more like a home. Wade often returned for the midday meal, and they would talk while eating. He told her about the ranch operations, explained the cycle of the cattle business, described the challenges of maintaining property in such harsh climate. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, her father's work as a schoolteacher, her mother's death when Victoria was 16. "That must have been difficult," Wade said. "It was. My father never recovered fully. He tried for my sister and me, but he was diminished by grief." "Is that why you understand about practical arrangements? You saw how loss can destroy romance." Victoria considered this. "Perhaps. My parents loved each other deeply. When my mother died, it nearly killed my father too. He lived another 7 years, but he was already half gone. I decided I would rather have something stable than risk that kind of devastation." Wade nodded slowly. "Love is dangerous." "It is." They sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd chosen safety over sentiment, and Victoria wondered if Wade had his own reasons for avoiding romance. In the evenings, after supper was finished and the hands had returned to the bunkhouse, Wade and Victoria often sat in the parlor. He taught her about the ranch's finances, explaining his system of record keeping. She was quick with numbers, and he seemed pleased by her aptitude. "You could help me with the books," he said one evening. "If you wanted. I'd like that." He smiled. He was smiling more easily around her now. "You're full of surprises, Victoria Xavier." The use of her married name still startled her sometimes. She was Victoria Xavier now, a rancher's wife in Texas, so far from the life she'd imagined for herself. Yet increasingly, she didn't mind. True to his word, Wade began teaching her to ride. The first lesson was comically disastrous. Willow was indeed gentle, but Victoria had no instinct for how to sit a horse properly. She fell off twice in the first 20 minutes. "I'm hopeless at this," she said, brushing dust from her skirts. Wade extended a hand to help her up, and this time he didn't release her hand immediately. "You're not hopeless. You're learning. Try again." By the end of the first week, she could mount and dismount without assistance. By the end of the second, she could ride around the property at a slow walk. Wade was a patient teacher, never mocking her mistakes, always encouraging improvement. "You're doing well," he told her after a particularly successful lesson. "Soon you'll be able to ride into town with me. I'd like that. I should meet our neighbors eventually. They'll want to meet you too." The women in town have been curious about the woman I married. Victoria felt a flutter of nervousness. What have you told them? The truth. That I needed a wife and found one through correspondence. They'll judge you regardless of what I say, so you might as well let them meet you and form their own opinions. His matter-of-fact approach to potential social judgment was oddly comforting. Wade didn't seem to care much what others thought, and his confidence was contagious. They rode into town on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after Victoria's arrival. She wore her best dress and fought to keep her composure as people stared. Wade guided her to the general store, where he introduced her to Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, who owned the establishment. Mrs. Henderson was a plump, friendly woman who immediately took Victoria under her wing. "How wonderful to finally meet you, dear. Wade has been quite mysterious about his bride. You must tell me all about yourself." Victoria found herself gently interrogated while Wade conducted his business. Mrs. Henderson asked about her family, her education, her impressions of Texas. The questions were nosy but not unkind, and Victoria answered as honestly as discretion allowed. "Well, you seem like a sensible girl," Mrs. Henderson finally pronounced. "Wade needs someone practical. He's a good man, but he's been alone too long." Other townspeople introduced themselves as word spread that Wade had brought his new wife to town. The women were mostly welcoming, if intensely curious. The men were respectfully polite. Victoria began to relax. These were decent people, and if their curiosity was pronounced, it came from genuine interest rather than malice. They were leaving the general store when a woman's voice called out, "Wade Xavier, don't you dare leave without introducing me to your wife." Victoria turned to see a striking woman approaching, red-haired and fashionably dressed despite the small town setting. Wade's expression became carefully neutral. "Victoria, this is Sarah Brennan." "Sarah, my wife, Victoria." Sarah's green eyes assessed Victoria with unnerving intensity. "How lovely. I was so surprised when I heard Wade had married. He's been resisting matrimony for years." "Perhaps he was waiting for the right opportunity," Victoria said mildly, "through a mail-order arrangement. How wonderfully practical." Sarah's tone suggested it was anything but wonderful. "Wade, you must bring Victoria to our gathering next week. Everyone is dying to get to know her properly." "We'll see," Wade said, taking Victoria's elbow. "Good to see you, Sarah." As they walked away, Victoria felt tension radiating from Wade. "Who is she?" "Someone I knew before." "It's not important." But his clipped tone suggested it was very important indeed. Victoria didn't press, but she filed the information away. Sarah Brennan was clearly part of Wade's past, and from her proprietary attitude, she wasn't entirely resigned to being relegated to history. On the ride home, Wade was quieter than usual. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "You don't owe me explanations, Wade. Our arrangement doesn't include that level of intimacy." He glanced at her sharply. "What if I want to offer an explanation? Then I'll listen." He guided his horse closer to hers. "Sarah and I were engaged 4 years ago. I was working cattle drives then, only in town occasionally. She wanted me to give up that life, settle down in town, take a job at her father's bank. I wasn't ready. We argued, she broke the engagement, and I left. When I inherited the ranch and returned, I thought maybe we could start again. But she's still trying to change me into something I'm not. I realized I didn't want that. I wanted someone who could accept me as I am." "Is that why you advertised for a wife?" "Because of her, partly. But also because she made me realize what I don't want in a marriage. I don't want someone trying to remake me. I don't want games and manipulation. I want honesty and partnership." Victoria absorbed this. "I have no interest in changing you, Wade, but you should know she's not finished with you. I saw how she looked at you. She made her choice years ago. That doesn't mean she's accepted the consequences. Wade smiled slightly. Are you worried, Victoria? I'm being practical. I have no claim to your affections, but I do have a legal claim as your wife. I simply want to understand what complications might arise. There won't be complications. I'm married to you now. That means something to me, even if it started as a practical arrangement. The conviction in his voice surprised her. They were entering something beyond their original agreement, some territory neither had explicitly acknowledged. Victoria found it both frightening and oddly thrilling. Life continued in its developing rhythm. Victoria grew more confident in her riding, more comfortable managing the household, more at ease with the ranch hands. Billy developed an obvious case of hero worship, following her around like a puppy when his work permitted. Tom and Charlie treated her with avuncular affection. And Wade was becoming harder to define. He'd begun touching her more, nothing inappropriate, just small gestures. A hand on her back as they walked, helping her down from her horse and letting his hands linger on her waist. Sitting closer to her in the evenings as they reviewed the ranch books together. She found herself increasingly aware of him, of his physical presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes followed her around the room. One evening, about 6 weeks after her arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their habit, this quiet time together after supper. Wade was teaching her to identify constellations as they appeared in the darkening sky. There, he said, pointing. That's Cassiopeia. Victoria followed his finger, standing close enough to feel the warmth of his body. I see it. It looks like a W. That's one way to see it. His voice had dropped lower. Victoria, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy here? She considered the question seriously. I didn't expect to be, but yes, I think I am. Happier than I was in Missouri, certainly. What about our marriage? Are you satisfied with how things are between us? Why do you ask? He turned to face her fully. Because things have changed, at least for me. This started as a practical arrangement, but I find myself wanting more. Her heart began beating faster. What do you want, you? A real marriage, not just a contract. Victoria stared at him, her careful defenses suddenly feeling inadequate. Wade, I know that's not what we agreed to. I know you wanted safety and stability, not romance. But I can't help how I feel. I care about you, Victoria. I think about you constantly. I want to be more than your business partner. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability in his expression, touched something deep within her. She told herself she didn't want love, that practical arrangement was safer. But standing here with Wade, feeling the pull between them, she recognized the lie. She'd been protecting herself from feeling too much, from risking her heart, and she'd failed. I'm frightened, she admitted. Of me. Of wanting this. Of caring too much and being hurt. Wade reached up and gently cupped her face. I would never deliberately hurt you. My parents didn't intend to hurt each other either, but love made them vulnerable. When my mother died, it destroyed my father. I can't promise we won't experience loss or pain. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise to face it with you, to be your partner in everything. He paused. I'm falling in love with you, Victoria. Maybe I already have. The words hung in the air between them, irrevocable and terrifying and wonderful. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. I didn't want this, she whispered. I know. I thought I could keep my heart separate from the arrangement. I know that too, but I can't. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. I care about you too, Wade, more than I intended, more than is probably wise. He smiled then, brilliant and unguarded. Then we're both foolish together. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Victoria didn't want to retreat anymore. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the chaste peck he'd given her on their wedding day. This kiss was deep and searching, and full of all the emotion they'd both been restraining. She melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders as he pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me tonight. Truly be my wife." Victoria nodded beyond words. He took her hand and led her inside, up the stairs, to his room this time instead of hers. They came together with a mixture of awkwardness and passion, learning each other, discovering what it meant to be truly married. And later, lying in his arms in the darkness, Victoria felt the last of her careful barriers crumble completely. "I love you," she whispered. Wade's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. I think I have since you stepped off that train looking so determined and scared. I was terrified." "You didn't show it. That was pride. I didn't want you to see how desperate I was. I saw it anyway, but I also saw your strength. That's what drew me to you, your refusal to be defeated by circumstances." Victoria turned in his arms to face him. "What happens now?" "Now we build a life together. A real one, not just a contract. We make this ranch a home, raise a family if we're blessed with children, grow old together. Everything I wrote about in those first letters, but with love instead of just practical partnership." "That sounds wonderful." "It won't always be easy. Ranching is hard work and this land can be unforgiving. I don't need easy. I need real and honest and worth fighting for. I think we have that." He kissed her again, slowly this time, tenderly. "We definitely have that." The seasons changed, and with them, Victoria and Wade's marriage deepened. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, became skilled at riding, took over more of the business management as Wade recognized her aptitude for organization. The hands came to respect her, and on trips to town, the women of Desdemona accepted her as one of their own. Sarah Brennan remained a minor irritant, making pointed comments when their paths crossed, but Wade's devotion to Victoria was obvious enough that Sarah's attempts to create discord fell flat. Eventually, she turned her attentions elsewhere, and Victoria could afford to be gracious in her victory. Winter came, milder than Missouri winters, but still cold enough to drive them all indoors more frequently. Victoria and Wade spent long evenings by the fire, reading together, talking, simply enjoying each other's presence. She was helping him plan spring plantings when she realized she hadn't had her monthly courses in some time. "Wade," she said one evening, setting down her pencil, "I think I might be with child." He looked up from the ledger he was reviewing, his expression transforming from concentration to wonder. "Truly, I'm not certain yet, but the signs suggest it." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms. "That would be incredible. Are you ready to be a father? Are you ready to be a mother? I don't know. I'm equal parts excited and terrified. We'll learn together like we've learned everything else." Dr. Morrison confirmed it 3 weeks later when they rode into town. Victoria was indeed pregnant, likely due to deliver in late summer. Wade was elated, fussing over her to the point where she had to firmly remind him she was pregnant, not made of glass. "I'm perfectly capable of continuing my normal activities," she told him after he tried to forbid her from riding. "The doctor said you should be careful. He said I should avoid unnecessary risks. Riding Willow around the property is not risky. Treating me like an invalid would be." Billy overheard this exchange and grinned. "She's got you there, boss." Wade gave Billy a look, but there was no heat in it. "Fine. But you'll ride slowly and only when I'm nearby." "That's reasonable. I can accept reasonable." As her pregnancy progressed, Victoria found herself marveling at the changes in her life. A year ago, she'd been desperate and alone, agreeing to marry a stranger for purely practical reasons. Now she was deeply in love with her husband, carrying his child, building a life she'd never imagined possible. The contract marriage she'd expected had transformed into a love story she could barely believe was her own. She was 6 months along, beginning to feel ungainly and uncomfortable, when trouble arrived. A neighboring rancher named Frank Dalton had been expanding his operation aggressively, and his cattle had been crossing onto Xavier land with increasing frequency. Wade had tried to handle it diplomatically, but Dalton seemed determined to provoke a confrontation. It came to a head one afternoon when Wade and Tom rode out to move Dalton's cattle back across the property line, and found Dalton himself waiting with several armed men. Victoria only learned about it when Charlie came racing back to the house. "Mrs. Xavier, you need to come quick. There's trouble at the north boundary." She felt fear clutch at her heart. "What kind of trouble?" "Dalton and his men. They're armed." "Wade sent me to get the sheriff, but I wanted to warn you first." Victoria made a split-second decision. "Saddle Willow. I'm coming with you to find the sheriff." "But madam, your condition, my husband is facing armed men. Saddle the horse, Charlie." He obeyed, and Victoria forced herself to remain calm as she mounted. They rode into town at a pace that made Charlie nervous, but Victoria refused to slow down. She found Sheriff Morrison outside the jail and quickly explained the situation. The sheriff, a competent man in his 50s, immediately gathered a deputy and rode back with them. By the time they reached the north boundary, the confrontation had escalated. Wade and Tom faced Dalton and 5 of his men, all armed, all tense. But when Wade saw Victoria, his expression shifted from anger to concern to fury. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "Making sure you don't get shot," she replied, dismounting with the sheriff's help. Sheriff Morrison stepped between the two groups. "All right, everybody calm down." "Frank, what's this about?" "Xavier's been running his cattle on my land," Dalton blustered. "I'm just protecting what's mine." "That's a lie," Wade said evenly. "His cattle have been on my property for weeks. I've been patient, but this ends now." The sheriff examined the boundary markers and the cattle in question. After a thorough assessment, he turned to Dalton. "These are clearly on Xavier land, Frank, and those are your cattle. You're in the wrong here." "The boundary markers have been moved," Dalton protested. "They haven't. I helped survey this property years ago. I know where the line is." The sheriff's voice hardened. "Move your cattle back where they belong, and there better not be any more trouble. If I have to come out here again, I'll be filing charges for trespassing." Dalton glared but backed down. He and his men herded their cattle away, shooting dark looks at Wade. After they left, the sheriff turned to Wade. "Watch yourself with him. Frank Dalton holds grudges. I'll be careful." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Victoria. "Madam, you shouldn't be riding out here in your condition." "I'm aware of that, Sheriff, but my husband's safety was at stake." Wade helped her back onto Willow, but she could feel his tension. They rode back to the ranch in silence, Charlie and Tom tactfully falling behind. Once they reached the house, Wade helped her dismount, then immediately launched into the scolding she'd been expecting. "That was incredibly dangerous. You put yourself and our child at risk. You were facing armed men. Which is exactly why you should have stayed at the house where it was safe." Victoria faced him squarely. "I understand you're upset, but don't you dare treat me like I'm not capable of making my own decisions. I assessed the risk and chose to get the sheriff. That was the right choice." The right choice would have been to send Charlie alone. And what if Dalton had started shooting before the sheriff arrived? What if I'd stayed home safe while you were killed? Wade's anger seemed to drain away. "You were that worried." "Of course I was worried. I love you." The thought of losing you, her voice broke. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her pregnant belly. "I'm sorry. You're right. You made the right call. I'm just terrified of something happening to you or the baby." I know. I'm terrified too. But we're partners in this life for better or worse. That means facing danger together when necessary. He held her for a long moment. You're remarkable, do you know that? I'm stubborn and reckless, according to you. Those too. But also brave and loyal and far more than I deserve. You deserve everything good, Wade Xavier. Don't ever doubt that. The trouble with Dalton subsided after the sheriff's intervention. Wade remained vigilant, and the ranch hands kept close watch on the boundaries, but there were no more confrontations. Life returned to its peaceful rhythm, and Victoria's pregnancy continued without complications. As summer arrived and her due date approached, Wade became increasingly anxious. He tried to hide it, but Victoria knew him too well now. "I'll be fine," she assured him one evening. "Women have been giving birth since the beginning of time. That doesn't mean it's not dangerous, no, but worrying won't change anything. Besides, Dr. Morrison says everything looks good. I can't help worrying. You're everything to me." She took his hand and placed it on her belly where their child was currently kicking vigorously. "Feel that? That's our baby, strong and healthy and ready to join us. Have faith, Wade." He smiled, feeling the movement under his palm. "I have faith in you." The baby came on a hot August night, almost exactly 1 year after Victoria had arrived in Desdemona. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Wade feared he would lose her. But Victoria was strong and Dr. Morrison was skilled, and just after dawn, their son was born. Wade held the tiny, squalling infant with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect." Victoria, exhausted but triumphant, smiled. "What should we name him?" They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Wade said, "Thomas. After my uncle who left me this ranch. Thomas Wade Xavier." "Thomas," Victoria repeated, testing the name. "Tommy, I like it." Wade placed the baby in her arms, and Victoria cradled their son, feeling overwhelming love and fierce protectiveness. This child, born from what had started as a practical arrangement, represented everything her marriage had become. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it. You're incredible. We're parents now." Wade sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arm around both of them. "I love you, Victoria." "I'll never stop being grateful you answered that advertisement. I expected a contract marriage. You gave me a love story worth telling." He kissed her forehead gently. "The story's not over yet. We're just beginning." Baby Tommy proved to be a healthy, lusty-lunged child who kept his parents up at all hours. Victoria adapted to motherhood with the same determination she'd brought to everything else, though the exhaustion was real. Wade helped as much as ranch work permitted, walking the floor with Tommy when he cried at night, changing diapers with fumbling hands, gazing at his son with wonder. The ranch hands were utterly charmed by the baby. Billy especially seemed fascinated, hovering nervously whenever Victoria brought Tommy outside. Tom whittled a set of small wooden toys. Charlie, who'd never mentioned it before, revealed he had 3 children of his own back east whom he hadn't seen in years, and spent long evenings telling Tommy stories while the baby gazed at him with unfocused eyes. Victoria's sister finally wrote, having heard through family connections about Victoria's marriage and child. The letter was stiff and formal, but it represented a tentative reconnection. Victoria wrote back warmly, describing her life in Texas, her husband, their son. She didn't mention how the marriage had started, only how it had become everything she'd never dared hope for. When Tommy was 3 months old, Wade surprised Victoria with a trip to take photographs in town. The photographer, a recent arrival to Desdemona, had set up a studio above the general store. They dressed in their best clothes, and the photographer captured them as a family Wade serious and proud, Victoria holding Tommy, the three of them together. The resulting photograph, when they picked it up the following week, made Victoria cry. "This is us," she said, staring at the image. "Our family." "Something to show Tommy when he's older," Wade agreed. "So he knows how much we loved him from the very beginning." That winter was the happiest Victoria could remember. Despite the cold and the hard work and the sleepless nights with a teething baby, she felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible. She had a husband who loved her, a healthy child, a home she'd made her own, and a purpose beyond mere survival. She was nursing Tommy one evening while Wade reviewed the ranch books when he suddenly looked up. "Victoria, we turned a real profit this year, more than I've ever made before." "That's wonderful. A lot of it is due to your management. The way you've organized everything, kept costs down without cutting quality, handled the supply orders, you've made a real difference. It's our ranch, our success together." He came to sit beside her, watching Tommy nurse. "I was thinking with this profit we could expand, maybe add more cattle or even try sheep. We could hire another hand, take some of the pressure off Tom and Charlie and Billy." "Those are good ideas. But Wade, can I suggest something else first?" "Of course." "Before we expand, I think we should improve the house. Add on a proper nursery for Tommy, maybe another bedroom for future children. Make this place truly ours." Wade considered this. "You're right. The house should come first. I'll talk to the carpenter in town, start planning additions." "Future children," he added with a slight smile. Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "Well, I assume we'll want Tommy to have siblings eventually. I'd like that very much. Though maybe we could wait until he's sleeping through the night first," she laughed. "That seems wise." The additions to the house began in spring. A proper nursery was built off the main bedroom, large enough for multiple children. Another bedroom was added upstairs for future needs. Wade surprised Victoria by also adding a small office for her, acknowledging her role in managing the ranch's business affairs. "You need your own space," he said when he showed it to her. "Somewhere to work without being disturbed by a crying baby or ranch hands tracking in mud." The room was modest but perfect, with a desk, shelves for ledgers and books, and a window overlooking the south pasture. Victoria was deeply touched by the gesture. Tommy was walking now, toddling around the house and getting into everything with the boundless curiosity of a young child. He had Wade's whiskey-colored eyes and Victoria's dark hair, and he was utterly fearless in a way that terrified his mother and amused his father. "He's going to be a handful," Wade observed, watching Tommy try to climb onto a startled barn cat. "He gets that from you," Victoria replied. "He gets it from both of us. You rode out 6 months pregnant to face down armed men. Don't pretend you're not bold." She had to concede the point. Life continued its rhythms. The ranch prospered. Tommy grew. And 2 years after his birth, Victoria discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Wade still worried, but he'd learned to trust Victoria's judgment about her own capabilities. Their second child, a daughter they named Vera Rose Xavier, was born on a mild spring morning. The birth was faster and less traumatic than Tommy's had been, and Wade was able to be present throughout. When Dr. Morrison placed the baby girl in Wade's arms, Victoria saw tears in her husband's eyes again. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She looks like your mother," Victoria said, having seen the daguerreotype Wade kept in his dresser. "She does, doesn't it?" He brought the baby to Victoria. "2 children now. We're officially a large family." Tommy, now 2.5, was initially skeptical about the squalling bundle that had invaded his home. But with patient guidance from both parents, he gradually accepted his sister, and even seemed proud of his new role as big brother. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. They added sheep to their operation, hired 2 more hands, and became one of the more successful operations in the area. Victoria became a respected figure in Desdemona, known for her business acumen and her warm hospitality. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors, especially after they started hosting an annual summer barbecue that became a community tradition. Tommy and Vera grew from babies to children. Tommy proved to be a natural horseman, riding before he could properly walk, fearless and skilled. Vera was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that reminded everyone of her mother. When Tommy was 7 and Vera was 5, they welcomed a 3rd child, another son they named James after Victoria's father. 3 children, Victoria marveled, holding baby James while Tommy and Vera peered at him with interest. When I stepped off that train 7 years ago, I never imagined this. Wade, graying slightly at the temples now but still strong and vital, smiled at his family. What did you imagine? Loneliness, going through the motions of a marriage without heart, making the best of a difficult situation. And instead I found love, real, deep, enduring love, a true partnership, a family. Everything I'd told myself I didn't need because I was too frightened to want it. He leaned down to kiss her, careful not to disturb the baby. Best decision I ever made, placing that advertisement. Best decision I ever made, answering it. The children grew and the ranch prospered. Wade taught Tommy everything about running the operation, clearly grooming him to eventually take over. But he also made sure Vera learned the business side from Victoria, recognizing that his daughter was sharp with numbers and organization. James, as he got older, showed artistic inclinations that neither parent had expected, filling tablets with drawings of horses and landscapes. He's different from the others, Wade observed one evening, watching James sketch by lamplight while Tommy and Vera played checkers. He is. But that doesn't make him less. I wasn't suggesting it did, I'm just wondering how it fits with ranch life. Maybe it doesn't have to fit, maybe he'll find his own path. Wade nodded slowly. You're right. We'll support whatever he chooses. This was the life they'd built together, one of love and acceptance, hard work and reward, challenges faced together and victories shared. The practical arrangement Victoria had agreed to had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. A true partnership in every sense, a love story that had started with a cold transaction and become something warm and alive and enduring. On their 10th anniversary, Wade surprised Victoria with a trip to San Antonio. They left the children with Tom and his wife, who'd married a few years prior and moved into a cottage on the property, and spent 3 days enjoying city life. They attended the theater, ate in restaurants, stayed in a hotel with actual luxury. But what Victoria remembered most was sitting with Wade in a park, watching people pass by and feeling utterly content. You ever regret it? Wade asked suddenly. Answering that advertisement. Giving up the chance for a different life. Victoria turned to look at her husband, this man she'd married as a stranger and come to love more than she'd thought possible. Never, not once. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. You did the same for me. I thought I wanted a practical arrangement, someone to help run the ranch and make the house feel less empty. I had no idea I was getting a true partner, a love that would transform everything. We were both foolish, Victoria said with a smile. Trying to arrange a loveless marriage when we were clearly meant for each other. The universe has a sense of humor. It does indeed. They returned to the ranch to find everything running smoothly. Tommy, now 12, had helped with the cattle work. Vera, 10, had managed the household accounts, and James, 8, had drawn a series of pictures documenting his siblings' activities in his parents' absence. The family was whole and happy, and Victoria felt a surge of gratitude for the life they'd built. More years passed. The children grew toward adulthood. Tommy proved to be a capable rancher, taking on more responsibility as Wade gradually stepped back. Vera surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to study law, having become interested in property rights and contracts through helping her mother with the ranch business. James eventually went to Austin to study art, supported fully by both parents despite the unconventional choice. "They're good children," Victoria said one evening, she and Wade alone for the first time in years with all three away pursuing their own paths. "We did well raising them." "You did well. I just tried to keep up." "Wade, Xavier, don't you dare diminish your role. You taught them strength and honesty and perseverance. They're who they are because of both of us." He pulled her close, and she leaned into him, as comfortable with his touch after 15 years as she'd been awkward those first weeks. They'd grown together, built something lasting, created not just a family but a legacy. Tommy married at 22, bringing his wife Eliza to live at the ranch. They built a house nearby, and Tommy took over day-to-day operations entirely. Wade and Victoria became advisors rather than managers, and the shift felt natural and right. Vera passed her law examinations, one of the first women to do so in Texas, and opened a practice in San Antonio. James had his first gallery showing in Austin, and several of his paintings sold for impressive prices. "We're officially old," Victoria observed on her 43rd birthday, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. Tommy and Eliza had 3 children now, and the sound of young voices filled the ranch again. "Speak for yourself," Wade replied, though his hair was now fully gray and his face bore the lines of years spent in the sun. "I'm in my prime." She laughed and swatted his arm. "You're 50. That's decidedly past prime." "Maybe, but I have you, our children, our grandchildren, and this ranch. I'd say that makes me pretty rich. Not in a financial sense. In every sense that matters." Victoria couldn't argue with that. They weren't wealthy by city standards, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were surrounded by love and family, still deeply devoted to each other after 2 decades together. The contract marriage she'd expected had become a love story that continued to unfold with each passing year. On their 20th anniversary, their children arranged a surprise celebration. The entire community attended, filling the ranch with laughter and music and good wishes. Sarah Brennan even appeared briefly, now married herself and mellowed by time. She congratulated Victoria with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You were good for him," Sarah admitted. "Better than I would have been. He needed someone who could love him as he was, not try to change him." "Thank you for saying that. It's the truth. I was young and foolish and thought love meant molding someone to fit my vision. You understood it means acceptance." After Sarah left, Wade found Victoria on the porch, watching the festivities from a quieter vantage point. "Tired?" he asked. "A little. Happy, though. This is wonderful." He sat beside her, taking her hand. 20 years. Can you believe it? Some days, no. It feels like I just stepped off that train. Other days, I can't remember life before you. I can't remember life before you. Or rather, I can, but it seems gray and empty. You brought color to everything." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. "I expected a contract marriage. You gave me a love story worth telling. We gave each other that. It's our story, Victoria, built together day by day, year by year. I wouldn't change a single thing, not even the rough parts. The arguments and struggles, not even those. They made us stronger." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family and friends celebrate, and Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. That desperate young woman who'd answered an advertisement for a practical wife would barely recognize the confident, loved woman she'd become. Wade had given her security, yes, but so much more than that. He'd given her partnership, respect, passion, and a love that had sustained her through every challenge. The ranch would continue beyond them. Tommy would run it, and his children after him. Vera's legal practice would help protect ranchers across Texas. James's art would capture the beauty of the landscape they all loved. The legacy she and Wade had built would endure. But that night, as they finally retreated to their bedroom, leaving the celebration continuing below, Victoria's thoughts were on the present. Wade pulled her close, kissing her with the familiarity of 2 decades and the passion that had never quite faded. "I love you," he whispered. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. You're getting poetic in your old age. You inspire it." She kissed him again deeply, remembering their first kiss on the porch all those years ago. So much had changed. So much had stayed the same. They were still partners, still lovers, still each other's greatest adventure. 20 more years, she asked. At least. "I plan to love you well into my 90s. That sounds perfect. And it did. The contract marriage had become something neither of them could have predicted or planned, a true union of hearts and minds and spirits. Victoria had stepped off that train expecting nothing more than security, and found everything she'd never known she needed. Wade had advertised for a practical wife and gotten a true partner who transformed his life entirely. Their story wasn't perfect. They'd had their struggles, their arguments, their challenges. But they'd faced everything together, and that partnership had made all the difference. As Victoria drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, she felt only gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, to this man, this life, this love. The years continued their steady march. Victoria and Wade grew older together. Their children thrived. Their grandchildren filled the ranch with energy and joy. Tommy proved to be as capable a rancher as Wade had been, and the operation continued to prosper. Vera became a respected attorney, fighting for women's property rights and making a real difference in Texas law. James's artistic career flourished, and his paintings of the Texas landscape gained recognition beyond the state. Victoria was 52 when Wade became seriously ill. It started as a persistent cough, which the doctor initially dismissed as a result of years of breathing dust and working in all weather. But it worsened, and eventually, Dr. Morrison delivered the diagnosis they dreaded: consumption. Wade's lungs were failing. The news devastated Victoria. After decades of fearing loss, the reality of potentially losing Wade felt unbearable, but she refused to crumble. She nursed him through the worst of it, managing his care with the same determination she'd brought to everything else in their marriage. "You're supposed to let me go gracefully," Wade said one evening, his voice weak but still carrying a thread of humor. "There's nothing graceful about consumption, and I'm not letting you go anywhere. Victoria, no, you don't get to give up. We have grandchildren to watch grow. We have years left together. You're going to fight this." He reached for her hand, his grip weaker than it once was but still there. "I'm not giving up, not when I have you to live for." The illness lasted months, and there were times when Victoria thought they would lose the battle. But Wade was stubborn, and her care was excellent, and slowly, impossibly, he began to improve. Dr. Morrison called it a miracle. Victoria called it sheer determination on both their parts. When Wade was finally well enough to leave the bedroom, he'd lost considerable weight and much of his strength. But he was alive, and that was everything. Victoria cried the first time he walked outside unaided, relief and gratitude overwhelming her defenses. "I told you," she said fiercely, holding him as he stood in the sunshine. "I wasn't letting you go. You're terrifying when you're determined. You should have learned that years ago." His recovery was slow but steady. He would never regain his full strength, but he could walk, could ride, could participate in ranch life even if he couldn't do the heavy physical work anymore. The experience changed them both, deepening their appreciation for the time they had together, reinforcing what they'd always known: their love was the foundation of everything else. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even their first great-grandchild, Victoria and Wade renewed their vows. It was Vera's idea, and Victoria initially protested that it was unnecessary. "We've been married 30 years, she said. "We don't need to repeat vows." "But you want to, don't you?" Vera asked perceptively. Victoria admitted that she did. After Wade's illness, after being reminded how fragile life was, she wanted to stand before everyone they loved and reaffirm their commitment to each other. The ceremony was simple, held at the ranch with Reverend Matthews presiding, just as he had 3 decades earlier. Victoria wore a new dress, deep blue like the one she'd worn for their first wedding. Wade wore his best suit, still too thin from his illness but standing straight and proud. When they exchanged vows this time, the words held the weight of everything they'd lived through together. The struggles and triumphs, the joy and sorrow, the ordinary days and extraordinary moments that had comprised their life together. 30 years ago, I stood here and promised to partner with you in building a life, Wade said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. I didn't know then what I was really promising. I didn't understand that partnership would mean loving you more each day. That building a life would mean creating something more beautiful than I could have imagined. Victoria, you took a practical arrangement and transformed it into the greatest love story I've ever known. Thank you for taking a chance on a rancher who didn't know what he really needed. Thank you for giving me this life. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she spoke her own vows. 30 years ago, I stepped off a train expecting nothing more than security. I was protecting myself from feeling too much, from wanting more than I thought I could have. You showed me that love isn't something to fear but something to embrace. You gave me partnership, respect, passion, and a family I cherish. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. Wade Xavier, loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, and I would choose you again every single day. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them renewed in their marriage, Wade kissed Victoria with such tenderness that several people in attendance openly wept. It was a kiss that spoke of decades together, of challenges overcome, of love that had only deepened with time. The celebration afterward was joyous. Their grandchildren played while their children shared stories and toasts. Friends from town and neighboring ranches filled the house and yard. Victoria moved through the crowd feeling deeply content, stopping frequently to accept congratulations and good wishes. Sarah Brennan approached late in the afternoon, her own grandchildren in tow. "Victoria, that was beautiful. You two have built something remarkable." "Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot coming from you." "I owe you an apology, actually. A very overdue one." "You don't, I do. When you first arrived, I was unkind. I was jealous and petty, and I tried to undermine your marriage. I'm sorry for that. You and Wade were clearly meant for each other, and I should have had the grace to see it sooner." Victoria was surprised by the genuine contrition in Sarah's voice. "That was a long time ago. We've all changed. We have. But I wanted you to know that I admire what you've built together. It takes real courage to open yourself to love and real strength to sustain it for 30 years. After Sarah left, Wade appeared at Victoria's side. What did she say? She apologized and complimented our marriage. Wonders never cease. He slipped his arm around her waist. Tired. A little. Happy, though. Me too. Though I could do with some quiet after all this celebration. They slipped away from the party, walking together toward the barn. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Victoria leaned into Wade and he tightened his arm around her. I meant what I said in my vows, he told her. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything. That's what partnership means. They stopped at the corral fence, watching the horses graze in the evening light. It was peaceful, beautiful, and Victoria felt the rightness of this moment, this life, this man beside her. You remember the first time we stood here together? Wade asked. When I introduced you to Willow. I was terrified of horses, and of you a little. I was terrified of you. This serious, beautiful woman who traveled hundreds of miles to marry a stranger. I kept thinking you'd change your mind and leave. I almost did those first few days. Everything was so different from what I'd known. What made you stay? Victoria considered the question. You did. Your kindness, your honesty, the way you treated me like a partner from the very beginning. You made me feel safe enough to take a chance on something more than a contract. I fell in love with you so quickly. I tried to hide it, tried to stick to our agreement. But you made it impossible not to love you. Good. Because I don't know how I would have survived this life without that love sustaining me. They stood in comfortable silence as the stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Victoria thought about the young woman who'd stepped off the train 30 years ago, so determined to protect her heart, so certain that practical arrangements were safer than passion. She barely recognized that woman now. Life with Wade had transformed her, opened her to possibilities she'd denied herself, given her the courage to embrace love despite its risks. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For being patient with me when I was too frightened to accept what we could have. For loving me even when I held back. For building this life with me. Wade turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Victoria, loving you has never required patience or effort. It's the most natural thing I've ever done. From the moment you stepped off that train, you've been it for me, the only one, the love of my life. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that years and hardship and laughter had carved there. I didn't expect this, any of this. I expected a contract marriage, an arrangement that would keep me safe and secure. Instead, you gave me a love story worth telling. Our story, he corrected. We wrote it together. The best story I've ever known. He kissed her then, sweet and tender, a kiss that held 30 years of love and the promise of whatever years remained to them. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Let's go back to the party, Victoria said. Our family is celebrating us. We should be there. They walked back hand in hand. Two people who'd started as strangers and become soulmates, who transformed a practical arrangement into an enduring love story. As they rejoined the celebration, their children and grandchildren surrounding them with warmth and joy, Victoria felt complete. This was the life she'd built with Wade, the legacy of their unexpected love. And it was more, so much more than she'd ever dared dream possible when she'd answered that advertisement 3 decades ago. The years that followed were gentler ones. Wade never fully regained the strength he'd lost during his illness, but he found contentment in a less active role on the ranch. He spent time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride, telling them stories of the early days, passing down the wisdom he'd accumulated. Victoria continued managing the business side of the ranch with Vera's help when she visited, and gradually began training Tommy's oldest son in the skills he'd need. Victoria was 60 when she finally had the conversation she'd been avoiding. Wade, we should talk about what happens when we're gone. They were sitting on the porch on a mild spring evening, the place where they'd shared so many important moments. Wade didn't pretend not to understand. The ranch goes to Tommy, obviously. The house, too. We've already arranged that legally. I know, but I want to make sure you've told him everything he needs to know, all the history, the decisions we made and why. I have. He's ready, Victoria. He's more than ready. She nodded, satisfied. And we should make sure Vera and James are provided for too. They chose different paths, but they're still our children. Already arranged. Vera doesn't need our money with her law practice, but she'll have her share. James too, they'll both be taken care of. Victoria took his hand. I'm not ready to leave this life yet, but I want to make sure everything is in order when the time comes. Neither am I. I plan to annoy you for at least another decade, she laughed. Only a decade. I'm expecting at least 2. Now you're just being optimistic. They sat in comfortable silence, and Victoria reflected on how lucky they'd been. Not everyone got decades of love and partnership. Not everyone built a legacy that would endure beyond them. They'd been blessed, and she knew it. Victoria was 65 when Wade died. It happened quietly one night. He went to sleep beside her and simply didn't wake up. Dr. Morrison said it was his heart, that given his history of illness, it was honestly remarkable he'd lived as long as he had. But medical explanations didn't ease Victoria's grief. She felt hollowed out by loss, as if part of her soul had been ripped away. The ranch, the house, even the landscape itself seemed diminished without Wade's presence. Her children worried about her, taking turns staying at the ranch to make sure she wasn't alone. But Victoria assured them she would be fine, even as she wasn't sure she believed it herself. She stood at his grave a week after the funeral, alone finally after days of being surrounded by well-meaning family and friends. The stone was simple, just his name and dates, but she'd had one line added at the bottom. Beloved husband and partner. 38 years, she said aloud to the stone. You gave me 38 years of love and partnership and life. I expected a contract marriage. You gave me everything. She felt the tears come again, hot and heavy. She'd cried so much in the past week that she thought she had no tears left, but apparently grief was an inexhaustible well. I don't know how to do this without you, she whispered. Everything we built together. What am I supposed to do now? The wind rustled through the trees, and Victoria felt the absurd wish that Wade could somehow answer. But he was gone, and she was alone in a way she hadn't been since stepping off that train so many years ago. But even as she thought it, she realized it wasn't entirely true. She wasn't alone. She had their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She had the ranch they'd built together, the legacy they'd created. She had decades of memories, of love, of partnership that nothing could take away. Wade was gone, but everything he'd given her remained. I'll be all right, she told the gravestone. I'll miss you every day for the rest of my life, but I'll be all right. You made me strong enough for this. She stayed a while longer, saying goodbye in the way she hadn't been able to when he died. Finally, as the sun began to set, she turned and walked back toward the house. Tommy was waiting on the porch, and he stood as she approached. Are you all right, Mama? I will be. It will take time, but I will be. He loved you so much. I know, and I loved him. That's what makes this so hard and also what will help me survive it. Love doesn't end just because someone dies. Tommy hugged her and Victoria held her son tight. Life would continue. The ranch would go on. She would find a way to live with this grief, and eventually, perhaps, find joy again in the legacy she and Wade had created together. The months passed slowly. Victoria stayed at the ranch, helping Tommy and his family where she could, spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Vera visited frequently, worried about her mother living alone in the house that held so many memories. But Victoria insisted she needed to be there, surrounded by the life she'd built with Wade. "I see him everywhere," she told Vera during one visit. "In the house, on the land, in our children and grandchildren. That's not painful, it's comforting. This is where I need to be." She fell into new rhythms. She woke each morning and walked to Wade's grave, telling him about what was happening on the ranch with their family in the world. She worked in the garden they'd planted together decades ago. She wrote down stories of their life for the grandchildren, wanting them to know the full history of the love that had started their family. One day, about a year after Wade's death, Sarah Brennan visited. She was elderly now like Victoria, her hair white and her movements slower, but her mind was still sharp. "I heard you've been spending time alone," Sarah said over tea. "I wanted to check on you. That's kind of you. I also wanted to tell you something. When my husband died 5 years ago, I thought I would die too. The grief was so enormous. But eventually, I found that love doesn't die with the person. It transforms. It becomes something you carry with you, something that enriches the rest of your life rather than weighing it down." Victoria nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand that. You and Wade had something rare. A true partnership, deep love, lasting commitment. That doesn't vanish because he's gone. It's part of who you are now." "Thank you, Sarah. That helps more than you know." After Sarah left, Victoria sat on the porch where she and Wade had shared so many evenings. She thought about what Sarah had said about love transforming rather than ending. It was true. She still loved Wade with everything in her, but the love was changing, becoming something she carried inside rather than shared actively. She was 72 when she finally felt ready to tell the full story. Her great-granddaughter Emma, at 15, had expressed curiosity about how Victoria and Wade met. Over the course of several afternoons, Victoria told her everything, the desperate circumstances that led to answering the advertisement, the arrangement they'd agreed to, and how it had transformed into something neither expected. "So you didn't love each other at first?" Emma asked, fascinated. "No, we agreed to a practical marriage, a contract really that benefited us both. But you fell in love." "We did. Despite our best efforts to keep it practical and safe, we fell deeply in love." "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard, Grandma." "You expected a contract marriage and he gave you a love story worth telling." Victoria smiled at the observation. "He did. We gave each other that. It wasn't one-sided, we both brought something to the marriage that transformed it. I want a love like that someday. I hope you find it. But remember, Emma, the greatest loves aren't the ones that come easily or fit neat expectations. They're the ones you build together, day by day, choice by choice. Wade and I created our love story through partnership and commitment and the willingness to risk our hearts. That's what made it special." Emma absorbed this wisdom, and Victoria felt satisfied. The story would continue beyond her, passed down through generations. The love she and Wade had built would become part of family lore, inspiring future generations to take chances on love despite the risks. Victoria lived to be 76, active and engaged until nearly the end. She died quietly in her sleep, in the house she and Wade had made a home, surrounded by family. At her funeral, Tommy spoke about his parents' partnership and love. Vera read from Victoria's writings about meeting Wade and falling in love despite her fears. James displayed a painting he'd done of Victoria and Wade together, captured from memory and from the old photograph, showing them young and full of possibility. They buried Victoria next to Wade, and the stone mason added her information to the marker. Below Wade's line about being a beloved husband and partner, they added, "She expected a contract. He gave her a love story." The ranch continued under Tommy's management, then passed to his children. The house was maintained and cherished, becoming a family gathering place for generations. The story of Wade and Victoria Xavier became legend in the family, the tale of two people who entered a practical arrangement and created an enduring love. Years later, one of Victoria's great-great-grandchildren would write a book about their story, based on Victoria's detailed journals and family oral history. It became a minor bestseller, inspiring others with the tale of how love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, how partnership and respect can transform into passion, how two people can create something beautiful from the most practical beginning. But for Victoria and Wade themselves, the real story wasn't in the grand romance or the enduring legacy. It was in the quiet moments shared on the porch, the partnership they'd forged running the ranch, the children they'd raised together, the challenges they'd faced side by side. It was in choosing each other every day, in building a life of meaning and love, in transforming a contract marriage into a true union of hearts and minds and souls. Victoria had stepped off a train in Desdemona, Texas, in 1879, expecting nothing more than security and a roof over her head. Wade Xavier had placed an advertisement for a practical wife, wanting help running his ranch and relieving his loneliness. Neither expected love. Both were determined to keep their hearts safe. Instead, they'd found partnership, passion, and a love that lasted decades and inspired generations. They'd built a ranch, raised a family, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with a simple advertisement, a desperate response, and the courage to take a chance on something unexpected. In the end, Victoria had been right when she'd told Wade that he'd given her a love story worth telling. But it was their story together, built day by day, year by year, through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. A story that proved love can bloom anywhere, that partnership can become passion, and that the greatest romances are often the ones nobody expects. The contract marriage Victoria expected had indeed become something far different, a love story for the ages, one that would be told and retold in the Xavier family for generations to come. And somewhere, perhaps Wade and Victoria could see how their love had created ripples that extended far beyond their own lives, touching countless others and proving that true love, once found, never truly ends.